Hey everyone, in this video, we'll go over the basics of Django forms. First, we'll start with an example HTML form and go over the basics of what's going on there, and then we will create a couple different examples using the Django form class and the Django model class to see how Django handles forms and how they make it much easier than doing everything ourselves manually. So let's go ahead and get started. So you'll see here, I created a example form view, I add the URL, and I create an HTML page for that. This will be available in the starting code link in the description if you want to get this code to start with. But I'm just going to go over this real quick just to kind of set up some sort of basic, hopefully, understanding of how these are working and what it's doing. And then we can go ahead and go into some more advanced examples with using the Django form classes. So what we have here is just an example class-based view with a get and a post method. I have a previous video going over class and function-based views and how to handle get and post methods in there. So if this is unfamiliar, you may want to go watch that first. But really all we're doing here is we're running this code whenever we have a get request, and we're running this code whenever we have a post request. So let's go ahead and take a look at our HTML form. And what I have here is I have two forms, a get form and a post form. And they both have one input with the name of your name and a submit button that says OK. So let's go ahead and jump into this view real quick. So jump into my browser here, which I already have the server running, and I'll go to localhost 8000/example form, which is a URL pattern I already created inside my views. This code's available there, but it's just a basic class-based view that goes to example form. Okay, so right here you'll see our two forms. We have a get form and a post form. Now looking back at our HTML template, our get form has a method of get, and our post form has a method of post. So this will submit a get method, and this will submit a post method. So this form right here will run this first function right here, and the second form will run the second function, this post function right here. So when we submit a get form, if I type a name in here, it'll do a get test and hit OK. You'll see it adds it to our URL. It puts your name, which is the name of our field here. We named that by setting name equals inside of the code. Put name equals your name and the value being the current name value. So what we're doing is we're taking that value and we're setting it in our URLs with the name of your name equals whatever we typed in. Now if we submit a post method, type whatever else in here and hit OK, the URL does not get updated. And if we had nothing in here at all, if I just went back to this, and we type something in here, it never updates the URL. That's because in a post form, sending a post method, we'll send the form data inside the body of the request. So it's just kind of different places where we put it. But so if you have more sensitive data, you may not want to put it in the URL or whatever else. You can make a decision of how you want to submit your forms based off of that. But right now, the way we're building this is we're building this all manually. We're creating a label, then we're creating an input, then we're creating our submit button. And we could build forms this way, but Django has lots of built-in classes that make this much easier on us. So let's go ahead and get into how those work. So we pull up the documentation. This will be in the link description below if you want to go take a look at this. But you'll see some basics here of what forms are, when to use a get and a post. And so this is good to read up on if you don't know that already. But what we're getting to now is this section down here. We want to get into Django's role in forms. So Django handles three parts of this process. They handle preparing the data and making it ready to render. They handle creating the actual HTML forms for the data. And they handle receiving and processing the submitted form data from the user. And the way to do this is with this form class. So we come down here, we'll see an example of a form class. So right here, they're importing this forms, and they're using this forms.form. And then from here, they can build the same form but using a form class, and that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to take our old form here, and we're going to build a new one, but using the Django formed class instead of using just the HTML lines like this, doing it all manually. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new view, and I'm going to call this forms basics. And I'll go ahead and I'll create a view class like that. And down here, once again, we'll have two methods, a get for a get request. And for now, I'll just put a pass just to not have to put anything there for now. We also have a post request. Once again, I'll put a pass for now. And what we want to do here is we want to create a form class object and then create an instance of that inside of our views and then use that in our template. And so we can put that form class anywhere, but kind of just by what's considered normal and best practices. Typically, you'll create a new forms file inside of your app. So in this case, inside my catalog app, I'll create a new file and I'll save this as forms.py. And outside here, I can put all my forms logic and then just import it into my views. So what I need to do here is I need to import one thing for now. So we'll do a from Django import forms. And now I'll go ahead and create my first Django form. So I'll create a class and I'll call this basic form. Now inside of here, we need to inherit from that form class that we imported. So we do form.form, which is the name of the class. And now inside of here, we can go ahead and build a form. Now Django has lots of built-in features for building different types of fields. So if we were to look at the docs, down here, you'll see an example. Let's see here. So down here, you'll see an example in the more on fields section in the documentation. You can go through different types of fields and it goes through the link right here, form fields. You click on that, it'll take you to all the lists of all the different fields and what they can do. So that's here if you want to go over all of them. I'll go over a few in this video, but there's many more you can go look at if you would like to. But what we want is just a normal text field. And so we can use this by using a char field. And so what I'll do is I'll create a your name variable, set this equal to forms.char field. And now inside of here, I can pass in a couple arguments. First will be the label. So what label do we want on this? We'll just say your name. And then we're going to go ahead and put a max length of, we'll say 100. That's probably enough for a name. Now we'll go ahead and save that. Now we can bring this form into our views and then actually use it inside the view. So what I'm going to do is go to the top of my views.py file. And so we'll do from.forms to get the forms py file inside this app. And we'll import basic form. I think I called it. Yeah, basic form. Okay, so we have that imported. Now we can go and use this inside of our view. So down here inside of our forms basic view, let's go ahead and use it in our get request first. So the way we can use this is we create a variable. In this case, I'll just call it form. Set this equal to basic form. And we can instantiate a new object by putting parentheses at the end of that. Now that we have this form created, we need to go ahead and use it inside of a template. So first, we need to go ahead and create a context object or context dictionary. And inside of here, I'll create a form value or form key and set the value to be our form variable we just created. Now, we can go ahead and render a template using this form. So I'll do a return render request catalog / forms _ basics.html. And we'll pass our context to have access to that form. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And let's go ahead and create that form or that template right now. So I'll create a new file and I'll save this as forms _ basics, which is what I called it in my view.html. And we can go ahead and grab our example form as a starting point. We'll go ahead and just copy this. Come back to our forms basics here, paste that. We're just gonna make a couple changes. So I'm gonna change this name here to basic form just so we can differentiate it by the title. But inside of our get form, we'll go ahead and make a change here. We're gonna go ahead and take this input value in this label and delete it. We don't need that anymore. And instead, what I can do is I can use that form variable I passed into the template. And to use form variables inside a template, inside of your Django template, you can put 2 curly braces to access that value. So 2 curly braces and type in form, which is the key that we passed in here. So this key right here just goes right inside of here and we should get our form. We don't have a post request set up, so I'm gonna go ahead and comment this out for now until we get to that. Now let's go ahead and create a simple URL pattern to actually access this basic form view. So inside my urls.py, first I'm gonna go ahead and import my basic form or my basic, what I call my view, forms basics, import forms basics. And then we'll go ahead and add a new URL pattern here at the bottom. So we'll do a path, and this will just be forms-basics. We will go ahead and add our forms basic. base6. I must have imported that wrong. Let's double check that. Yeah, base6 with an S. And we'll do dot as underscore view. So this is a class-based view. Now let's go ahead and go to this URL pattern in our browser. So we'll go to forms-basics. And now we have a get form. It looks like we have an extra curly brace though. Let me go ahead and just delete that real quick. Oh yeah, I don't know why this is down there for. We don't need that. Let's go ahead and save that back here, refresh the page, and that should be fixed. Okay, and now we type in something in here, test, and you'll see it puts your name equals test instead of our URL. And that's because we're correctly running a GET request on our form. And so you'll notice what we did here was we're able to replace all of the data that creates the inputs. We still need to create a form, tag, and our submit button. But everything else we can replace with this form variable. And this might seem kind of pointless since we only had one field, but if you had many fields, this would be much easier than writing everything out manually. And if we jump back into the docs here, you will see what it actually replaces. So if we look at it up here, you'll see when we add the label argument, we're creating a label HTML tag, and then we're also creating an input based off whatever field type we passed in. In our case, we use a char field, so we're going to get this text type. And a note here does not include form tags or submit buttons, so we can do those ourselves inside the template, which we did do. Okay, so now we have our GET request working using a basic form. Let's go ahead and do the same, but let's go ahead and build a post request now. So I'm going to go ahead and uncomment this field right here, this post form with this method of post. And we'll still need to keep our CSRF tokens, so let's leave that there. But all this label and input stuff can go away as well and replace with our same value being our form. And I'm going to name this post underscore form just to make it different. But now we go ahead and add that to our post view so we can actually access this in our template. So back to our views.py, I'm going to create that post form value. So post underscore form equals basic form. Now there's one different thing we need to do here. And this comes down to bound versus unbound forms. Forms with data and forms without data. A bound form is a form with data inside of it, and an unbound form is a form with no data. An unbound form is what we have up here. It will show blank or default values, but a bound form may have values already passed in. So let's say you're creating something where you want to edit something in the database. You may want to show the user the previous values inside the form fields so they can go ahead and make updates to those values instead of having to go from a empty from scratch form. And so in that case, you'd want a bound form. And you can create a bound form by inside of the parentheses passing in request.post. And that passes in the request.post data that was submitted in the form. Now, from the rest of this will look exactly the same as our previous GET request did. So we'll do a context value. This will be equal to, in this case, it'll be post form. Set that equal to post form. And then we'll go to return a template, return render, request, catalog / forms basics.html, and then pass in our context to have access to that post form variable. Now we come back to our view here. Let's go ahead and delete all this out of our URL. And now you see our post form is not showing up. And the reason for that is because we only create it inside of our post request, but we have a GET request. We want an unbound form to show up. So what we can do is below our form inside of our GET request, we can type in post underscore form equals basic form, just another basic form. And then down here, we can go ahead and pass in post underscore form, set that equal to post form. Now we save this, we re-render this page here. You'll see we have an unbound form showing up with the empty values with a your name value. Now let's say I type in something like post test. I hit OK. You'll see it went through and it filled in this post test form. And now this form is now a bound form because there's a value inside of this field. Now you'll see that our GET form went away. And once again, that's because we only use that form inside of our GET requests. But if we also want to show up on a post request, we'll need to add that value down here as well. So we can add another unbound form by doing form equals basic form with nothing in the parentheses, nothing passing as an argument. into the constructor for this basic form, and we can go ahead and pass in form and set that to be form, and then we'll get another unbound form showing up on our post request. So if I went back here, did our get request, passed in another test, whatever, hit OK. Now both forms are showing up. This is an unbound form because it's empty, and this is a bound form because now it has data inside of the fields here, or the one field in this case. Okay, and that's really all we have for a really basic form. So let's go ahead and go over a couple different form fields we could use. So I'm going to go ahead and add a few fields to this form just as an example. First, we have an email field, and that's a pretty straightforward field. It will add some extra validation for us to make sure that we're passing in something that looks like an email. If I save that, I come back here. You'll see if I type in anything random and hit OK. Oh, I got to add something here first. And then hit OK. You'll see that it says, please include an @ in the email address. Now, if I were to include an @ hit OK, you'll say, please enter a part following the @. So I can put something like example.com, and then when I submit, it will then go through. So it adds just a little bit of extra validation to make sure we're entering something correctly. And that's all given to us by default, which is super nice to have. The next field we can go over is a Boolean field, and this is just a checkbox. I'll create a value and I'll call it checkbox. Set this equal to forms dot Boolean field. Now in here, we'll go ahead and put a required equals false, so they don't have to check the checkbox. And then we come back to our browser here. I'll delete all this stuff out of our view, out of our URL. Come back here. You'll see now we have a checkbox, and I can enter whatever here, enter whatever here, and I can check it, or I can enter whatever here and leave it unchecked as well, and it still goes through just fine. And finally, the last field that you'll probably use pretty often is a char field, but we're going to update and change the widget to be a text area field, so it will allow multi-line text input. So I'll call this a comment, so we're pretending like we're adding something where you can add a comment to something, and we'll do a forms dot char field, and we'll pass in a label once again like we did up here for our first char field, and we'll call this comment. But then we can go and override the widget in this argument. So we'll do widget equals forms dot text area. Save that. Come back to our views here. Delete all of this. Run this, and now we have a text area where we can enter multiple lines of text. Okay, perfect. Now let's go over what these widgets are. So once again, I'll have this documentation in the description, but they have a page on widgets. And what a widget in Django is Django's representation of an HTML input element. So it handles the actual rendering of the HTML, and it uses HTML5 syntax. So if we take an example of some different widgets here, you can see them all down here to the right. We have text, number, email, URL, password, hidden, date, date time, all those sorts of things. And we can change the widget by just putting widget equals and then a different widget inside of the actual form field itself. So for example, let's say we want to make a password input. We have this password input widget right here, and it creates a password input type. And that way it hides the actual text as you type it in, puts little dots instead of the actual text you're typing in. Let's go ahead and say we want to add that to our fields. So what we can do here is I'll put this right underneath the email field. I'll put password. I'll do forms.char field because this will be text, so it'll be a char field. And we'll do a label equaling password. And then we'll go ahead and do a widget equaling forms dot. And looking at the docs here, it was password input. And so we go into our widget argument here and do password input and save that. Now we come back to our views, to our URL, and to our browser and to this page. You'll see we have this password field. When I type instead of here, it now shows the little dots instead of showing us the actual text that we get over here. So we can create a password field or any of these other fields by overriding the default widget. And you can see there's various different widgets we can use, and you may want to override these and use custom widgets at some points in time. And that's all here where you can learn about them in the description at this link. Okay, the next step of working with forms is down here with the field data. And this goes over how to get the data from the field. So right now we're typing things in here, but we're not actually doing anything with this data. So let's go ahead and change that and actually capture this data and print some values to the terminal. And you'll see here, this is fairly easy to do. Django has a form is valid, which checks if the data passed in the form, if it was valid. And then we can grab those values by creating a variable, putting form, or whatever we named our form, in this case it would be form or post form, dot clean data, and the name of the variable we put inside of our form class. So let's go ahead and go over an example real quick of doing that. So let's say we want to print out our name and our email to the terminal. Let's go into my views here and make that happen. So for this example, we're going to handle this in our post request. We're going to take these values from the post data and then print them out to the terminal. So what we want to do here is we're only focused on our post form with the post request post data. We're not focused on our get form. This is just here to render an unbound form on our page so it doesn't show up as missing after we submit the form. So right before our context, what we want to do is check first, is the form valid? And Django has a built-in method to do this. So if form.is_valid, if this is true, then we know the form is valid and we can do something with that form. So what we want to do here is we want to grab both of those variables. And we can do that by creating a variable name. In this case, we'll call it name to get the name value equals, well, actually, before I do anything else, this should be post form. Since we're on a post request, post form that is valid. It'll do name equals post form dot cleaned data, put square brackets, and then we put the name of the field. So in our forms.py, we call this your name. So that's what we'll pass in here. Is we'll put your underscore name, and that will get the value of whatever's saved in this your name char field that we created right here. We can do the same thing for our email field. So we'll do an email equals post form dot cleaned data email. And once again, that's what we called our field right here. This email field is called email. So whatever we get from the clean data with the key of email will be whatever we save in that field. Let's go ahead now and just print both these out to the terminal. So we'll do print name and then print email. Go ahead and save that. And now let's go ahead and try this out and see how this works. So back in our browser with our two forms, let's go ahead and look at our post form and submit some data here and see what we get printed to the console. So I'll just do something like test name, test at example.com. We'll give it a password and we'll type in some comments, whatever, right here. We'll hit OK and submit that. Go back to our terminal, open that up, and you'll see here we printed out test name and then test at example.com. So we're able to grab these values out of this request.post data. We're able to check if this form is valid. If it is, let's go ahead and grab our name field and our email field and print them out to the console. And you can do that with any of those fields. You can access them this way and do whatever you need to do with them. And of course, you could take these fields and save an object in your database if you want to do that. But there's an easier way to do that, which we'll get to at the end of this video. But before we get to that, let's go over a couple more different options we have with this form class inside of our template. So right now, all we did was just pass the post form inside of a variable, and that was it. There's a few more things we could do. If you look at the docs, we scroll down a little bit more, you'll see we have these three options of how to render these label input pairs. We can use as P, as UL, or as table. And this as P is probably the most common you'll see used. So let's go ahead and use that one real quick. What it will do is we'll wrap everything inside of paragraph tags like this. So if we go to our template, we're just to put dot as underscore P and save that. Come back to our form here, reload this page, you'll see it immediately changed. And if we go ahead and just do an F12 and we go ahead and just inspect these elements right here, you'll see that every form tag here is wrapped in P tags. And of course, we can change this to any of those options. If we were to change it to as UL, come back here and reload this page, you'll see it changed it to UL elements. We can expect it to double check that it created a UL and wrapped everything in LI tags. So those are options you could use to make things look better, but of course it still doesn't look super great. So you have a better option you could use, at least a better in my opinion, which is Django Crispy Forms. I've used this in previous videos if you've seen those. I'm not going to go over how to actually use them in this video because that's a little more advanced beyond the basics of forms, but you can install this package and you can use this crispy tag or a crispy filter to make things look better. And there's different template options you can use. You could use Bootstrap, you could use Uniform, there's different ones you could use, but it makes your forms look better almost instantly. So that will be a link in the description if you want to go learn more about that. I've used it in previous projects here. I'm not really going to go into it in this video, but that's another option I wanted to make sure that you knew was available. Okay, now with that done, this last option to go over will be rendering fields manually. So right now, what we did was we just passed in the entire form object here. We never did anything beyond that, but we could also access individual fields as well. So for example, I could type in your underscore name and nothing else, save that, come back here, come back to our template, reload this page, and now all we have is that your name field here. And also to point out, it's just the actual input. We don't have the label on here because that your name field is just the input. But if you look in the documentation, complete label elements can also be generated using the label tag. So if you want to go ahead and make it manually, you could. At this point, if you wanted to go ahead and just do a label, and just put whatever in here, you could do that. Or you can access the label field itself by doing post form, passing in the field, in this case your name, .label tag, and save that. Come back here and reload the page, and you'll see your name now shows up. And we're only showing one field here because we're only rendering the field, that one field manually. And we could add more if we wanted to. We could copy this. If we wanted to, we could, add our password field as well. Let's go password right here. And password right down here. We'll come back here, reload the page. And now our password field is showing up. We type in here, and it's still the normal password widget that we added earlier. So that's all working great. So that's another option. If you don't want to show every single field, you can render the fields you would like to have manually. Okay, now the last thing we're talking about in this video is how to use forms, but use them specifically for creating objects based off of a model. So in the previous videos in the series, we built various different model objects here: an artist, album, song, a catalog item. Let's go ahead and stick to using our artist model like we did in our views videos. And let's go ahead and create a form to manually create another artist. Now, if you saw the previous videos, we use a generic view to do this, with this create artist generic view. But if we wanted to, we could do this manually. And this is how we would go about doing that. To do this, I'm going to create a new view. So what I'm going to do, below this view, I'm going to go and create a new view. I'll do a class of, we'll call it artist manual create. We'll pass in our generic view class. We'll have a def get method, pass in self and request. And we'll go ahead and have a def post method, self and request. First, let's build this get method. So this is going to be very similar as before. I'm going to go and build this whole method out, and then I'll create the form afterwards. So we'll have a form that we'll call artist form. And this form will be built here in a second, but for now, we're just going to go ahead and just pass in an artist form. And next, we need to add that to our context. So we'll do a context equals form, and this will be our form variable that we added up above. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and render this template. So do a return render request catalog / artist underscore create underscore manually. And we'll build this template here in a second as well. And we'll pass in our context value right there. Now, we're going to go ahead and build out our post method. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a space there to make it look a little better. We'll go ahead and create a form variable, and this should be a bounded form. So we want to go ahead and create our artist form and pass in the request.post data again to get the values that were passed in, that the user passed in to this form. Then once again, we'll go ahead and render or create a context and render the template. Return render, we'll pass in request. We'll pass in our template again, same template, artist create manually.html. And pass in our context. And now the last thing this view needs to do is actually save the form. And Django model forms, which we'll get here in a second, have a built-in save method. So I'm going to go ahead and add that right now. So first we'll check if the form is valid, if form.is_valid. We'll do a form.save. That's all it takes to save a model form. Let's go ahead and get into actually building this model form, and hopefully this will make a little more sense then. So you can jump into our form set py. Let's go ahead and create another form down here. Be a class of artist form. We'll pass in forms.modelForm. And now inside this form here, instead of creating all of our fields, what we'll create is another inner class called meta. It will pass in the information for our model form here. So first we want is our artist model, since this is going to be an artist form. So let's go ahead and get that from our models. So we do a from.models import artist. And now instead of our meta class, all we need to do is set the model in the fields. So we can do a model equals artist and a fields equaling, in this case, we're gonna grab all of the fields. So I'm gonna do it __all __. Now I could, if I didn't want to do this, I could do fields equals and then pass in a list. I could grab each field. So for example, I could go to my models. I could say, okay, I want the name, the email, and the bio. And I could do name, email, and bio. And it would show just those 3 fields. But if you want to show all of them, instead of having to type every single field in, because you can see here, we have kind of a lot of fields. That's kind of a lot to type in. Instead of doing that, I can go ahead and just put __all __ instead of quotes, and it will do that for me. That's just kind of a shorthand, notation for that. Okay, and so this model form has a save method built in. So it will show all the fields. We'll set it up to connect to this artist model. And then when we call the save method, instead of our views, it will just save that to the database for us. So we don't need to handle any of that logic ourselves. It will do all that for us, which is super, super nice and easy to use. Let's go ahead and create a URL pattern for this view, and then we'll go ahead and test it out. So instead of our URLs, we'll import that new view, which was artist, what did I call it? I called it artist manual create. Artist manual create. And then down here, we'll add another path. So do a path of, to call it just artist-create, I guess will work. Artist manual create.as_view, because it's a class-based view. We'll save that. Now let's go and test this view out. Artist form not found. What did I call my form inside of my views here? Oh, I never imported that form. So up here at the top, from our form here, we'll import artist form. We'll save that. Come back here. Let's go ahead and try this again now. Oh, I forgot to create the template. Let's go and create the template real quick, and then we'll test this out. So inside my catalog templates here, I'll save a new file, and I'll call it whatever I said it was here, which was artist create manually. Artist create manually.html. And this will be very similar to the other form. So I'm going to go and just grab the code from the forms basics. Let's go ahead and just grab all of this, and I'll make a few changes to this. So I'll paste this in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this get form, or just this get form right here. And I'll just do artist form or something right here. And artist form. Let's go ahead and change all of this right here. So I'm going to delete all of this. And in this case, in this view, we passed in a variable called form. So let's go ahead and use that form here. So I'll come in here and I'll do 2 curly braces to pass in a variable and put in form. And then I'll change this value here to like submit or something. We'll save that. We'll come back here, reload the page, and there's our form with all of our fields. Now, of course, we can make this look a little better by wrapping it all in p tags by putting .as_p. Reload that, and now it just kind of makes it look a little bit better. But now we should be able to create an artist and save it. Now, before I run this form, at localhost/artist, I have a list of every artist that's in the database. And that was created in one of the views videos. So that's just there, and I'll use that to test this to make sure it's working. Just so you know how I'm getting to that, that was already created, and that will be included in the code in the description. Let's go ahead and create a new artist real quick. So we'll do a manual create artist. Do a manual create at example.com. we'll say this artist was manually created. I'm not sure what's required. Let's try to submit that. And then let's go ahead and go to /artist. And there you go. You'll see we have a manual create artist, and this artist was manually created. So we were able to create a new artist in the database with with very little code at all. I mean, all we had to do was pass in a meta class, a model in our fields, and then add it to our views, call the save method if the form is valid to actually save the object in the database, and then create a simple template to just to display that form. So that's all it takes to use these model forms to save objects to the database. It's super easy to do, and it's much easier than trying to do everything manually within your view and your template. And so that's all we're really going to talk about today. There's many ways you can customize these model forms. I'm not going to get into a lot of those today because I wanted to go over just the basics of how to use these things. But I could go ahead and add fields or customize fields up above the meta class. There's some more options you can pass in down here. I'll have the link right here to the model form documentation if you'd like to get into how to do that here. But I'm not going to do it in this video, at least not in this one. Maybe I'll create one in the future, but for now, we're going to stop here. So all the documentation will be in the description below. Hopefully this was useful in getting you an introduction of how to use Django forms. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.